as everyone, we have Vicky Carrick, who's our Immigration and Talent Acquisition Manager at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. She has graciously accepted and has done this for the past couple of years and helped us out with some understanding some of the logistics of different visa pathways, and will be able to give us some brief insights on how these pathways work in the first half of today's meeting. And we also have like a few of our other panelists who are neonatologists who took different pathways. First, I would like to introduce Ale Barrero. She did her fellowship training at Boston Children's. She went through a O1 pathway for a fellowship, and then now she's a neonatologist with Boston Children's Hospital. We have Parthu Kumar Avaru, who also did his fellowship on a J1 visa at St. Christopher's, and now he is almost about to complete his J1 waiver job in Wichita, Kansas. Myself, I'm Sai Muktapuram. I'm a neonatologist at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. I pursued my fellowship in H1B pathway, and then now I'm on employment-based green card and still like waiting in the waiting list and on an H1 currently. So that's your panel for today. We were also supposed to have Viral Jain join us, but he's stuck in his travel, and he's willing to answer any questions if you have any questions regarding research pathway and sponsoring your own like or institutional based EB1 pathway as well. With that, I'll hand over the presentation and the floor to Vicky. And Vicky, you can let me know when you want me to advance the slides. Okay, thank you.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you, and hello everyone. I'm really happy to be here. Yeah, keep it on the first slide for just a minute because this is really, really important. And I'm going to start by just saying that, as you all know, anything with immigration is long and painful, but the green card process and the different pathways to get there is particularly painful. And patience is paramount. Patience with whatever institution is helping you with this process, and patience with the immigration process, because it's not gonna, you know, if you're emailing every day to find out what the status update is, there won't be one, and it will just stress everyone out even more. So patience is very important. I also always advise against Googling, and I know everyone does it and everyone's gonna do it, but if you Google to find out information, just make sure that you're verifying it with whoever is helping you through these processes, because everyone's situation is different. It may seem like it should be exactly the same, but there might be one little thing in somebody's, you know, CV or background or visa status or, you know, something little that makes the entire process different. And I've seen that happen. So just keep those things in mind as you're moving into these processes. You can advance. Next slide. Yeah, next slide. And yeah, understanding the process. So EB, so at a high level, EB stands for employment-based. This is something that USCIS uses to differentiate between an employment-based process and a family-based process. And I'm only going to talk about employment-based processes here. That's more than likely what you're going to be interested in, especially if you're interested in the waiver process that I'll talk about in a few minutes. The process typically starts, so in the big picture of thinking about a green card process, we're looking at three main big buckets. So the first bucket is typically the recruitment process in PERM. That is the process where you have to re-advertise your position, and it adds probably about 5 or 6 months onto your process. Or if you have a process that doesn't have any recruitment attached to it, then you'll be starting at what our second big bucket is, which is the I-140, or otherwise known as the immigrant petition. And there are priority dates that are going to be important that I'm going to talk about in just a minute. but those three main phases are, like I said, the perm, the I-140, and then the I-485, which is the actual application for green card. So the green card process is itself the doesn't even include applying for the green card until the very end of these processes. The perm, stay on that, yeah. The perm and the immigrant petition can be done prior to the visa bulletin dates. And by visa bulletin, I'm not going to assume that you know, so I apologize if this is information that you already are aware of, but every month the government issues a visa bulletin that has these priority dates on them. The priority date is either going to be the date that your labor certification, which is part of that perm bucket, was filed, or the date that your I-140 was filed. So it's going to be either one of those two dates, depending on what process you go through. And every month, the visa bulletin will tell you where that priority date is, depending on what country you're charged to, which is typically your country of citizenship. Sometimes it's a birth country if that's different. And if you're married and you're doing this as a team, sometimes that can be different too, but it's typically your birth country. If the visa bulletin is current, the entire process takes about 2.5 to 3 years, and that's the whole process. So with the perm and the application for the green card. So you can, next slide. And so I just wanted to talk about some specific types of processes that you may experience. And I know, Sai, you had mentioned that you're on an H-1B now, and some of you also are on H-1B now. That is a good scenario because you don't have to worry about a two-year home residency requirement. And so you have different options for green card. You can go straight into those processes instead of having to wait for a waiver to come through. But the H-1B, and let me just take a minute to talk about how somebody may decide on which process you're gonna go to. The labor perm process is considered employment-based second category, so this one is a little bit slower than a first category that I think is maybe on the next slide. But this one is typically where so for two reasons. One may be that your CV doesn't meet the standard for an EB1. EB1 is outstanding researcher professor, and it's very difficult for someone who's coming out of a fellowship to reach that standard. Just to be completely honest, it was developed more for seasoned individuals who have a lot of publications, who have, invited talks, who have conference presentations. Those are not the only things. It is possible for someone who doesn't do as much research to qualify. It's just more difficult because of the way that it's set up and the evidence that is being requested during that. So the EB2 is a little bit slower, but it's more of an objective process than a subjective process. It adds on, I think I said about 9 to 12 months, because the labor perm process includes advertising your position and that has to be advertised for 30 days, and then there's a 30-day grace period. And so that, plus the time that it takes to prepare the advertisements and the time that it takes for the labor certification to be actually approved, adds on about a year. This one is preferable if you're just too busy to gather all the information together, or you don't quite meet the criteria, that this is a common one. And so I've put down here, it could be up to 2 years with the audit. The I-140, the immigrant petition, is about 4 to 6 months regular processing, and that premium processing is available for this type of immigrant petition. And then of course you have the green card application. What I have at the bottom, for those of you that may not have seen it, is just one, and this is old, this is dated, but this is an example of a visa bulletin just for this second category. I have seen the new bulletin, and actually, in some cases, the visa bulletin is actually advancing. For example, for India, it's advanced by about 14 months recently. So really, really good news in that arena. So you can, next slide. Yep.
Vicky,
Yeah.
also, can you please comment on the costs and who takes care of the costs in like each of these individual processes, please?
Sure.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
sure. So well, I'll start with H-1B only because it's very important that no foreign national on one of these processes is paying for the H-1B. That is a sole responsibility of the employer. For example, here at Children's, the division pays for that, and there's no room for negotiation on that. With the labor perm, this EB2 that we're looking at here, the part of the perm, so the part of that labor certification must be paid for by the organization, by the employer. There's no negotiation on that either. When you get past that stage and you get to the immigrant petition, the I-140, that can be negotiated with your employer who pays for that. So in some cases, if your employer is positioned and able to pay for that and that's their process, they can, or you can. So if you're talking to an employer that says, you know what, we can't pay for this whole thing, we might have $5,000 or 7,000, but we can't pay for the whole thing. Know that they are responsible for the perm part, labor certification. You can pay for the immigrant petition and the green card application. So a little flexibility there.
Great.
Okay, now next
Thank you.
slide. Yeah. Okay, and then one back, I think. Yeah. So these are two other options if you're going from H-1B. The NIW stands for National Interest Waiver. This term has been used a lot in this last year with COVID as well. So I just want to differentiate when you hear this term what it actually means. In the context of employment-based immigration, the NIW means the second priority advanced degree with a waiver. So on the previous slide, we were talking about the perm and labor certification. That is the same category. It's the EB2 advanced degree process. The NIW is the same. It's the EB2 advanced degree with a waiver. And what makes it NIW is that you are going to be making an argument to the government saying that I don't need to go through the recruitment process because the work that I do here is so important in the United States that process, the recruitment process, can be waived. That's what makes it an NIW. You may have heard it. You may have heard of it in the context of traveling right now with COVID. There's what's called this national interest exception, which is completely different from any of these processes we're talking about today. But they like to use the same word. So I just wanted to point that out, that they mean two different things, and that the NIW is actually that same advanced degree category, but with that waiver that you don't have to do the recruitment. This also, the national interest waiver, starts with the second big bucket. It starts with the immigrant petition and is in the second category. And I have noted there the time frames, again, 10 and a half to 14 months plus prep time. This is a substantial application. It's a subjective application. And so it does take some time to put that together. Premium processing is not available for this particular type of petition. So keep that in mind as well, especially if one of the things that's important to you is something being done quickly. And then the H-1B to EB-1 is another option. The EB-1 is what I had mentioned earlier about it being a more exceptional category, and it is also subjective. That's why I put them on the same slides. It also takes time to put it together. Both the NIW and the EB-1 take a lot of time and effort from you, the person who is going to be the beneficiary of this. But if you can't, depending on the country that you're from, the EB-1 typically is the fastest category. I say typically because in the past 12 years, we've seen it completely upside down. And sometimes people will come back and say, I thought this was the fastest one. I'm like, yeah, so did I. But it's all flip-flopped. And I think it has flip-flopped back now. Every month is a little bit different, but it's typically the fastest way to get through the process to go to the green card. So the EB-1 involves the immigrant petition and the green card itself. So it does not include any recruitment. And usually in this type of application, it's about a year and a half total time period for that, and about 5.5 to 7.5 months just for the immigrant petition. And again, the bottom is just an example of where you see that on, or how you see that on the visa bulletin itself. So in this example, I'll just show in this example, if you are from China, and let's say that this is the bulletin from this month, if you're from China, then they are working on these first category, this EB1, for petitions that were filed for immigrant petitions, the I-140 that were filed in February 8th, 2018 and sooner. But if you're from, Canada, or you're from the United Kingdom or somewhere in Europe, it's current, which means that you can either file the I-140 and the I-1 or 485 together, the green card and the immigrant petition together, or you can do one right after the other, and there's no wait time. There's no retrogression in between the immigrant petition and the green card application. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I know that a lot of people are also on the J1, and I know that this is the subject for a lot of blogs and online discussions as well. And so it's something that we definitely need to take some time on. The J1 clinical, so there are two different, those of you that may not know, there are two different big categories of J1 visas. There's the J1 for researchers. So depending on what you came for, you may have had this in the past, even if this isn't your most current one. And then there's also the J1 clinical. I think the majority of this group probably, if you're on a J1, has come on the clinical. So I'm going to just focus on that. Anybody that comes on a clinical J1 visa as a clinical resident or a clinical fellow will be subject automatically to a 2-year home residency requirement. And what that means is that in the agreement for you to be able to come here to the United States and do this training, you agree to go back to your home country and take what you've learned back with you for 2 years before you can move on to an H-1B or some other non-immigrant visa and green card. In some cases, though, things change while you're here, and an opportunity comes up and you're needed, and so you want to stay here instead of going home for those 2 years. And so in that case, you'd be looking for a waiver. And I know that out in the world, it's called a waiver position. And that just means that a position that could support some sort of waiver. The most common one for this type of situation is the Conrad waiver, and it is for clinicians. It's clinical. It's a commitment of 3 years in clinical work, so it's minimum of 40 hours per week for 3 years, and it's very specific. It varies from state to state, but the Conrad 30 typically is um, it's a program that will provide medical services to everyone, no matter what your geographical or socioeconomic status is. And so it's more for primary care and for those employers that are in MUAs, medically underserved areas, or in HPSAs, the health professional shortage areas. But there are, at least in Ohio, there are some flex spots. And so even subspecialties, sometimes we're able to get waivers for. In Ohio, the applications usually open in January or February of that fiscal year, which starts in October 1st and due March 31st. Decisions July, August. It varies from year to year. For example, this year it didn't open until May, and the applications were just due at the beginning of this week. So very late, very late. That is the most typical one, and probably the one most people are looking for. There are some other options. The HHS waiver is for people whose career trajectory would be research. Um, this is, like I note there, 8 to 9 months prep, 2 years processing minimum. It's actually been longer during COVID. And at the end of it, if you're approved, there's no time period that you have to spend doing particular research in any organization. You'd be able to move directly into a permanent residency application. What's unique about the HHS waiver is that it not only looks at what you're doing, it also looks at what the institution is doing and what your PI is doing. So it kind of takes that holistic view of the work that you're doing and how it's important for this country. Once you get the waiver, then you can move into one of the typical permanent residency processes. The waiver is, like I said, usually 3 years for Conrad, 2 years for HHS. There are also waivers such as the persecution and hardship waivers. Those are things that most employers don't really get involved in. And so if you think that you might be eligible for one of those things, that's something that you'd probably want to work with an outside counsel. Once your waiver time period is up, you can move into one of the permanent residency processes that we talked about. There is no restriction. If you want to start doing an immigrant petition before your waiver is up, you can do that. You can do that and get it approved even while you're still working on your waiver. What you just can't do is apply for the green card. You have to have that waiver completed and the certificate of completion before you can apply for your green card. At the bottom, another option for those of you that have the 2-year home residency requirement is the O1 non-immigrant visa. This is not permanent residency. It doesn't waive that 2-year home residency requirement. What the O1 will do is buy you time and allow you to continue working for a situation like you can't find a waiver job in time, or maybe the institution that you're going to be working at has more people who are applying for waiver jobs than they have slots open. This might buy you an extra year. So if you meet the requirements, and they're very similar to the EB1 that I spoke about earlier, the O1 is for outstanding researcher professor. And you can look up what the requirements are, and you'll see there it's the same kind of thing: research and presentations and invited talks, that kind of thing. But then you still will have to have some sort of waiver after the O in order to move into a green card process. And I forgot, Sai, you asked me to talk about costs. The waiver is usually paid for by the institution, although there is not any kind of statutory requirement for that I'm aware of. The EB2 I mentioned, the labor certification part of it is paid for by the institution, and the rest, the rest could be paid for either by the institution or the employee. The O1 can also be paid for by either the institution or the employee, depending on the position of the institution and the agreement that is made at the time that you take the job or later. You can advance to the next slide. And did I miss any with the costs? The EB1 is to say there's nothing in the EB1 application that is statutorily required for the employer to pay. So if that is a problem for the employer, that is something that you as the employee can pay for. So other questions and considerations: can you change jobs if your green card sponsorship has already been filed by another employer? And the answer to this is, depending on where you are in the process, if you have applied for the labor certification or the I-140 and you've been approved, you can't change jobs, because the labor certification is very specific to the job that you're going to be holding at the time the green card is approved. And in some cases, you're probably doing the math, this can be a very long time. And depending on where you're from, it could be 10, 12 years. It could also be faster if you're, from Europe or someplace where the visa bulletin is current. It could take a year and a half to 2 years. But while before you go into the green card process, you cannot change jobs after that has been filed. Once you've filed for the I-485, you do have flexibility after 180 days to port, what they call port, to a different position. It needs to be a position that's based on the same criteria, the same qualifications as the job that you were in the process of, but that does give you a little bit of flexibility. The issue with that is that the issue with that is that a lot of times green cards are already approved by that time, but in recent years it has taken up to a year for the green cards to come in, so that is a little bit of flexibility. H-4 visa processing: changes of spouse and children of H-1B doctors. I think that this question was regarding the H4 and being able to work. Um, so if you have spouses that are on H4 and you're H1B, they are not allowed to work until you have an approved I-140 immigrant petition. At that point, you can use that approval notice to be able to get an employment authorization document to apply for that for your spouse. Sai, if you're interpreting any of these questions different than I am, please speak up, but I think that's what that was talking about.
I think you're on the right track. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And costs, I've already covered that. So if you have any specific questions, let me know about that. And travel and dependents, can spouses work? So there are some points in these processes where spouses can work. I just mentioned the H4, as long as you're far enough in the process where the I-140 is approved, they can apply for an employment authorization document. Another place where spouses can work is at the point where you apply for the green card itself. There's also an option at the same time to apply for employment authorization documents. And so if the green card is going to take a year, your spouse may be able to work, within 2 or 3 months, depending on the processing times of the EAD. So that's another spot where spouses can work. The Other than that, there really aren't any options during this process. For travel, you can travel on whatever status you're in at the time that you're doing the perm process and the labor, or I'm sorry, the perm process and the immigrant petition. Those are not green card applications or immigrant applications in terms of adjustment of status. So the typical, the official USCIS terminology for a green card application is an adjustment of status. Whereas when you're going from one non-immigrant petition to another non-immigrant petition, it's a change of status. So as long as you haven't applied for an adjustment of status, then you can travel as you normally would. There are some caveats to that. If you're on an H-1B, it's much easier because it is considered a dual visa, meaning that USCIS already knows that you're probably going to be, or you could be, applying for a green card while being on an H-1B. And so you can travel on an H-1B and be able to come back on an H-1B even if you're in the process of this. If you're in another status, for example, if you're going straight from J1, which would, and actually the only way that that would happen is probably through an HHS waiver. There will be some travel limitations. J1 is not dual intent. A TN, for those of you that might be from Canada or Mexico, is also not a dual intent. So if you're not on an H-1B and you're in this process and you want to travel, please make sure that you are talking to your immigration advisors to make sure that you're not going to get stuck or that you'll be able to get back in the US, because there are some restrictions. Is there another slide? Just processing times, the appendix. Yeah, and you can send this out to everybody so that they can go to these URLs to check out those processing times.
Absolutely.
And then I think you also sent me some questions.
Yeah. There's some questions in the chat box, Vicky. Thank you.
Okay.
And that was pretty comprehensive and very helpful. I'll share all the slides with the participants. The questions in the chat box today are: after completing a waiver and changing employers, what should we check with the new employer regarding visa and green card? Like waiver employer is working on filing a green card, so should we ask them to hold that application since I want to change my employer after the waiver? So if someone's like finishing up their waiver, should the employer who they're doing their waiver with file the green card, or just wait for the new employer to file for the green card, as I'm assuming, will have like 3 more years on H-1B to work on?
Yeah, so a lot of this will be very dependent on your situation, but I think most times, if you're not going to be staying with the employer who you did the waiver with, they're not likely going to want to sponsor you for a green card after that. And I don't really think that it's appropriate for you to ask them to, because it's a very expensive, long process. And if all you want is the green card and then to leave, just make sure that they know that up front. Typically, I think it would be more the new employer. So if you complete the waiver, let's say that you've done the Conrad waiver, you get to the end of the 3 years, you look for a job that will support you in the green card. You can, as Sai just mentioned, you still have the waiver is only 3 years. You're going to be on an H-1B during those 3 years. You still will have another 3 years of H-1B. So I think more likely it would be you find an employer that will sponsor your green card while you're on H-1B, and then have your new employer do that. In the case of employment based, so something that you need a job for, and those would be the perm positions primarily, and those once you're whoever sponsors that, that's the job you need to be in when the green card is approved. So if your current employer is going to be doing those processes for you, you will end up having to stay there at least until the green card is approved, and then a reasonable time period after that. At Children's, we think of a reasonable time period as of about 6 months. So keep that in mind too. If you end up going a pathway where a job is not required, and the very highest category is that you don't need a job. So that's the exceptional ability. Um, you don't have to have a job, so it doesn't really matter who sponsors that. You can do it on your own, and the national interest waiver you can also do on your own. But usually, it's the job you're moving into, the position you're going to be in when the green card is approved.
Great. Great. I hope that answered the question. There's a couple other different like J1 waiver scenario questions, Vicky. So let's say if I completed my waiver right after my fellowship, residency. I did a pediatric residency on J1, completed my resident waiver right after the residency, and then now I started my fellowship on H1. Like it will only be 3 years on this H1 after I started my fellowship, and the J1 would also be on, the waiver would also be on an H1, right? So that's another 3 years. So when I'm graduating from my fellowship, should I go through the whole perm process before starting with a new employer? Because it would be a total 6 years on H1.
Okay, I'm not sure I'm following. So you have your residency,
Yep.
you go through a waiver process. So you're
Hi,
working, let's say a Conrad 30, is that what you're thinking?
hi, Sai.
Yep.
Can I?
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
can I go in? Okay. So, hi. Thanks for the talk. It's very
Yeah,
useful.
sure.
My name is Arun. So I actually did my residency and then went through 3 years of Conrad 30. I worked as a
Okay.
pediatric hospitalist,
Okay.
and during that time, I applied my perm process and then I-140. So
Okay.
my wife actually has a H40 EAD, and I have approved
Good.
I-140.
Mm-hmm.
Now I came back to fellowship to do neonatology,
Okay.
and I'll be completing another 3 years of H1 in the neonatology fellowship on H1. So when I graduate after 6 years, since I have approved I-140 and a priority date, can I just apply for H1B extension, or should I have to wait for the whole perm process and I-140 to go through for the 7th year of H1?
No, so that's a good question. So your H-1B can be extended with the I-140 approval.
Thank you.
So yeah. So your whoever files your H-1Bs for you would use your I-140 approval to get. And if you are in retrogression, where are you from?
I'm from India, so I'm in backlog. Yeah.
Okay, so if you're in backlog, otherwise in the immigration world, USCIS calls it retrogression. If you're in backlog, then you should be able to get an additional 3 years. And then every 3 years until you're current.
That explains it. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Sai.
Yep. And are there any more questions in the chat box there? Scroll down. Oh, okay. So, Sai, I'm looking for these questions that you sent me. Let's see.
I was gonna, Vicky, I was gonna ask Ale and Parthu to just share their experiences
Yes.
on J1, because they both have different pathways, face different hurdles. so they can go ahead and start sharing their experiences, and
Yeah.
then we will pose the questions that were asked before the webinar right after that.
Sounds good.
Ale, do you want to go first, please?
Yes, hi everyone. Sorry, I was turning off my video. I have a little,
Aw.
I'm gonna show you guys. Mateo, he's just a few weeks old and it's in between like feeds and crying. But thank you for having me. So thank you for inviting me again. So I, as you said at the beginning, so right now I finished my fellowship last year, and since July 2020, I switched from J1 clinical from my training to an O1B. And before that, I'm right now employed at primarily I'm at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, and I have some time at Boston Children's. And it ended up working well, but it was very stressful, obviously, as you can all, as you know. Before I got the O, I actually had my hope was to apply for a waiver, and I end up doing it because, as Vicky said, like as a subspecialist, and also in the area that I was applying, the zip code where the hospital is based, both Boston Children's and BI, they are not in undership. They are not MUA. They are not. They have the patient that we were trying to make a case as if as if many of our patients also are in public insurance, and that they come from these MUA sites, but because the hospital, like the zip code of the hospital is not, it was really hard to get that waiver accepted. So actually I did apply it on my second year of fellowship. I applied to the waiver in Massachusetts, to one of those 30 Conrad waivers, actually to 10, because the flex spots were 10, and I was not able to get it. So at that time, I had already 6 years of my J1 and had to apply for the 7th for the extra year. And I was lucky that I was on a research fellowship too, that I had 1 year left. So I was able to keep that visa, because if not, it's really hard to just keep it, to keep that extra year of J1, just, extending your clinical fellowship if I was technically done clinically. So I was able to extend that for a year. And then the second year, that extra year, I guess that 4th year of NICU fellowship and research fellowship is when I applied for the O. And I'm happy, so that I let other people talk and give their experiences. I'm happy to talk to anyone that is interested in knowing more. As of now, right now, I'm basically finishing my first year of O. I have 2 more years, and I could keep on applying for the O until I die, or the plan, because I still have, as Vicky said, the J1 requirement, the 2-year home requirement. I'm starting to explore the different options. So at this point, I could the different pathways that could be, again, like applying, like going back to Mexico, I'm originally from Mexico, or applying to the waiver again, or extending the O, or looking into all these other options like hardship waivers and all those things. But right now I'm starting to explore, because I can't believe that it's been already a year, and time flies, and in no time it will be, my 3 years will be up again. So I'm happy to talk to you guys more about the details and all the criteria. It seems very daunting, because there are many things that are, like you need to have publications, you need to have these recommendation letters, but there's many things that you might, like if you are in your first year of fellowship, or just started, like just about to start fellowship, there are so many things that you can start doing, other than, of course, publications and all those things, but things that will help you get your recommendation letters, or to be, for example, one of those is, review papers, as like having someone to invite you to review for a journal. Those kind of things like help, like just they want to know that you're, to get you all the points so that you can get a no at some point. I don't know, Sai, if there's anything else in particular that people have asked about. Oh, but again, like I'm happy to, I can put my email and my number on the chat, and happy to talk to anyone that is interested to know more about knowing more.
Sweet. Does anyone have any specific questions for Ale? If not, I'll ask Parthu to share his experience. Someone raised their hand. If you had a question specific for Ale, go ahead and ask now. If not, I'll get your question answered a little bit later. I think it's someone whose name says iPhone on it.
Hi, Ali. Thanks for the information. I have a question. Is it, the waiver is so competitive? Is it in a specific state, or is it in general for neonatology?
I think it depends on the states, because there's only, like, in every single state, and Vicky can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's 30 spots in every state. So depending on the state, there's going to be a lot more competition than others. So there's, like if you have a state like California that is huge and has so many programs, or Massachusetts that, even though that is not that big, it has many, many programs. You're totally, it's very, very competitive. It's not impossible. Like there's people that, like that get, of course, the people they have priorities if you're in primary care, if, like depending on if you're in a hospital that is obviously 100% in an underserved area. And so depending on the year, there might be some possibilities than others, but in general, yeah, depending on the state, it's very difficult.
And Vicky, can you elaborate on the process of, like, let's say if I apply for a waiver in our state, what does the application, what does the government or the state look into before deciding whether I'm a qualified candidate or not? Is it always first come, first serve versus, oh, we have more need in this area this year, so let's give all these people who are working in this specific area jobs? How does that work out, Vicky?
So Ali was exactly right that it's different in every state. What is consistent between states is that there are 30 spots for each state, and that the primary purpose of the program is to provide health care for people in underserved areas, whether that be geographic or socioeconomic. And so some states, Ohio, for example, doesn't they don't make, so the Ohio Department of Health has purview over this program, and they don't make decisions based on the subspecialty. Once you're past, if you're not primary care and you're not psychiatry in your subspecialty, they don't make those determinations. What makes you eligible is that you're going to be working with at least 30%, if not more, people that are on Medicaid, Medicare, or sliding scale, and that you are fully licensed and can work. So I think that's different in other states. There may be some states that really may have a need, and Ohio has the discretion to change what they do from year to year as well. But I've been doing it about 10 years in Ohio, and they don't have any, like, it doesn't, they're not saying, oh, we've got too many neonatologists, so we're not going to give this person. That's not how they typically work.
Right. Thank you. Parthu, do you want to go ahead and share your experience with the group, and then I'll pose some questions related to J1 right after?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Parthu. I did my fellowship, finished my fellowship last year at St. Christopher's in Philadelphia on a J1 visa. So I did 3 years residency and then 3 years fellowship, 6 years on a J1. And then I went through a Conrad 30 process and filed for the state of Kansas and got my J1 waiver approved there and transferred to H1 subsequently after approval of J1 waiver. And currently I'm finishing my 1 year of waiver job at Kansas. And yeah, so I can answer any of the questions through the process, yes.
So both Ali and Parthu, so there's lots of questions about J1 waiver job timelines. So can you explain, or can you tell us within your experiences, how early you started looking for jobs, how early you've applied, and any other advice from a timeline standpoint for people applying this year? Both Ali, you can go first.
Sorry, so I would say, like, as early as you can. Like, if like you're starting, particularly on a J1 visa, or I guess any type of visa, but in my case that I was on a J1, that I knew that for sure I had the 2-year home requirement. As early as you can start, the better. It's hard. I feel that I was lucky that I was able to stay because I was working with them from very early on. So try to start working on with your program, with your hospitals, to see if there's any chances that you could stay there. Because if there are chances, then you can work with them from the very beginning and start like gathering, as I said, like all the requirements for the other type of visas. And also for you, it's important to know if there's like no possibility that you can stay there, to start looking for jobs that would support your visa application. I started basically, very early on, I wanted to stay at the BI because there's a lot of health services researchers, and that's what I wanted to do at that time, and what my research fellowship was about. And so I tried to connect like my mentors and everything. Like I had them from the very beginning at BI, and I had a conversation very early on to figure out, if there was a possibility, if I could be supported there. So I would say probably by second year is when we started talking about because we applied for the waiver. The application is open in October of my second year fellowship. So by that time, to be able to apply with everything, all the documentation, we probably started talking about that on like May of my second year fellowship. So yeah, I would start as early as you can.
So the sooner the better.
Yeah, the sooner the better.
Parthu, how did you find the job that you found for J1 waiver? And what are some of the advices you would give like people applying this year on how to find a J1 waiver job?
So how to find a J1 waiver job? So so it's like any other neonatology job in general. Like then you have to figure out like, is that waiver eligible or not? So you can look at the common websites like where you look for a job for in general for neonatology. Like either you can look like Career MD or even Mednac's website for careers, where you can look for a physician job and see in general. And then, so only some of the jobs recruiters do mention that it is eligible for waiver, or it is like, at least they'll say visa eligible, something like that. Then the problem comes is like, you have to figure out whether it's MUA or MUP, like medically underserved area, or it serves medically underserved population per se, or it helps if someone has already there doing a waiver, or someone in the past have done. So that helps because the employer is already used to the process. So like looking through the regular job websites and finding out, and there is a website to look if the particular address of the hospital comes under MUA or MUP. I can share that link with you, Sai, and then you can send it out. And then it's like HRSA data tools where you can see which areas comes under medically underserved or not. Like, and there is for Delta waiver, there is a Delta website too, where you can look for these areas specifically. And basically most of the academic jobs, like in bigger institutions where there are fellowships, can sponsor waiver depending on, because the population they serve more or less, even though hospital doesn't fall under medically underserved area directly, the population they serve usually comes from medically underserved areas surrounding or underserved population. So you can even apply through that route as well. But it helps if you know that someone has already taken a job in that area or surrounding that site. So that really helps to smooth the process.
So either trying to find someone who's already doing a waiver job in that area, or just approach recruiters to say, hey, your website listed this, but have you worked with J1 waivers before, as you're advised?
Yes.
Getting to that. Okay. Looks like Dr. Myers has a question for Vicky. Go ahead, Dr. Myers.
So Vicky, as a fellowship program director, what are common ways that we can support our fellows through the process, or what are common errors that fellowship directors do that impede the process? I guess so in a nutshell, like what can we do, and the fellowship program directors who watch this video, what are the best steps for us to take to support our fellows?
I think you're taking the first step now by learning more about these processes. Knowledge is very important to be able to support the fellows. One thing that is very helpful is when there are just discussions early on about whether there will be positions available for the fellows that want to stay and there's a position for them. And this is always difficult because a lot of times they're asking a year and a half before they're going to start, and that's not a typical time frame when you're looking for a position or when you're looking to hire someone in a faculty position. So as much as you can be the liaison for that and try to help whoever would be hiring this person, why it needs to be done so early. Another issue that comes into play sometimes is that there are, and Ali mentioned this too, that there are a lot of times more people than there are spots. And that goes for not only the state, but also the institution. And so if there are, 6 people, let's say in Ohio, from one institution that wants a waiver job, or that the department wants to keep for a waiver job, it's very helpful, again, to have the knowledge to be able to talk to the different program directors, division directors, and start to kind of prioritize, or have the division directors prioritize, what is most important for the hospital. If we only had 2 spots, does this person even stand a chance of staying here? And if you know those kinds of things early on, you can advise the fellows to make sure that they're looking at other places too for a waiver job. But definitely thank you for attending this, because that is will go a long way in helping your fellows.
Thank you so much.
You're
and
welcome.
Dr. Myers, another thing I would say is, like, from my own experience, just being transparent with the leadership that the timelines for fellowship candidates or fellows on visa is slightly ahead, or even, like, I would say maybe almost a year ahead of how it works out with fellows without visa. It was really helpful in my case, like just letting the leadership know that if I don't sign my contract by this point, I won't probably be able to start by the time you want me to start, was one thing that was really helpful in my case. So yeah.
And one other thing I just want to add is that depending on the state, there may be a gap, an unavoidable gap between the end of a fellowship and the beginning of a Conrad or waiver job. And so being aware of that early on and helping the fellow talk to the appropriate people about backup plans and what you're going to do if there's a 3-month gap or a 2-month gap or whatever the case may be. Sometimes you may want to go ahead and try to get someone on an O so that there's no gap, and then go into the waiver. Or sometimes the only option might be a vacation home, which isn't a bad thing, right? Get to see your family. But just to be aware of what the options are, and start those conversations early on, and so that there's no expectation that there's on June 30th your fellowship ends, and on July 1st you're going to be all set in this waiver job. It doesn't necessarily work that way, depending on the state. And I do think that Ohio is very, very far behind other states. So a lot of states, I think, do open these programs on October 1st, but some of them don't. And so you just need to understand the states you're applying for, and understand what those timelines are for each state.
Thank you. Super helpful.
There's, like, I'll get a last couple of questions answered that were submitted before. One was on completing the 2-year rule in home country and then come back to apply for a job as a neonatologist. What are the things we can do to improve our CV? Just similar to the things you would do here, like if you're wanting to apply for an academic position and wanting to apply for a research position after you complete your waiver, get involved in some local research and try to keep publishing if that's what the pathway you're looking for. If you're looking for a private practice job, I would say, like, get yourselves like involved with a busy private practice in like the home country, and make sure your experience continues, and still trying to keep up with the CME, with attending conferences in the US shows that you are interested in coming back to the US. So that's one question that was posed before the.
Sai, can I add something there real quick?
Go for it.
Something that's really helpful in that situation, that is in a category all of its own, are peer reviews. And these are difficult when you're in a fellow position, but if it's something that you're able to do, it satisfies a whole category on its own. So when you do an O1 visa, you have to satisfy 3 categories, and peer reviews are one. So something to keep in mind.
And that's good for the program directors here too, because one of the things we need to do is to feed those opportunities to our fellows on visas, right? And so,
Yeah, and it's important that they are getting direct invitations from the journals instead of the PI getting the invitation and then forwarding it, because I know that that happens a lot too. If that happens, there's really no evidence that we can submit to USCIS that this fellow was, you know, that the journal requested the expertise of this fellow to give that review. And so it's important, if you can, and again, it's not always very easy, but have the journal invite them directly.
great, thank you.
And the one other question is, how do we negotiate better salary while on visa? I would say, like, at least in our experience, like, your priority is like, should be like getting a job that you really are passionate about and you're going to be enjoying and excited about, and making sure that they're willing to go through the strenuous and also expensive immigration process for you. That, I would say, would be the biggest priority. And as long as your salary and pay is comparable to what has been offered within the group previously, if you know the norms in the area, I would say, like, your priorities should be finding that right job which is willing to go through this process for you, just like with almost any other jobs. Find the right fit. That is the priority, obviously.
Yeah, and from an employer's point of view on that, some of these processes can be $20,000, and so that is it's a very big commitment for an employer to take on for someone new, and even someone who's been there for a while. So yeah, Sai, great point. Definitely keep that in mind when you're trying to negotiate salary.
Any other questions from the audience? If not, we'll close it with some closing comments. Anyone in the audience have any specific questions? Looks like Bhavna raised her hand. Bhavna, you can go ahead and ask your
Yeah, I have a question. It was kind of partially answered and discussed. So I'm currently on a waiver position and I'm from India. So obviously there's a lot of backlog. And after end of my first year of employment, my current employer started like the green card process. Like it's still in the process and they are going to file ETA 9098. So but I don't want to stick with this job after I finish my waiver. So I just want to know, will there be a problem for me to switch jobs in another year?
So I think I addressed that in the chat, but I didn't understand that your current employer was the one that was doing the labor, because that form that you mentioned is the labor certification form. So yes, that will be a problem because that labor certification form and the position that's sponsored during that form is the position that you have to hold when the green card is approved at that institution. And so if you don't plan to stay at that institution, this is going to be a waste of their money.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yep.
Great. Any other questions from audience?
I did have one more thing that I wanted to mention about the O1.
Go ahead.
When Ali was on earlier, she had talked about the staying on the O1 and the timeline on that. And I just want to clarify that the first O1 petition can be for 3 years. And then after that, it's an application for extension every year annually. And although there is no statutory cap like there is with the H-1B, USCIS can decide, they have the discretion to say, you know what, this is a non-immigrant visa, you've been on an O for 10 years, it doesn't look like you're planning on going home. So we're not going to continue to extend this non-immigrant petition. So they do have that discretion. I haven't really seen that very often, but it is possible.
Great. Any closing comments and advice, Vicky? And then I'll pass it on to Parthu and I'll give my closing comments too.
Yeah, I mean, it's, like I started my presentation, it is a long, painful process, and there are lots of moving parts to it, and there are a lot of things that need to happen in order for it to be successful with the end game of a green card. It's obviously possible. A lot of people have done it, and a lot of people are in the process, and just be patient, make sure you know what your options are, be knowledgeable, and ask questions.
Great, great, thank you. And Parthu?
So regarding waiver, I think Ali was like told us about the timeline, like how sensitive the timeline needs to be and how early you should start the process. So the earlier the better. Like as soon as you started your fellowship, you should have an idea and you should at least try to acquire the knowledge required to know about the waiver process so that you don't waste more time again. So the timeline, I would say again, like start at least like your later half of your second year to think about it and prepare your resume and getting your letters and working on your what do you call that, like personal letter, cover letter, and then like by March of your like last year of fellowship, like I think second year March, you should be able to start applying for jobs. And then because most of the timelines will open like in October, exception would be like Texas, which opens like September 1st. So most of the states like October or November, and some states like throughout the year process, like New Jersey too. But usually you should be aware of that, where you're looking and your geographical locations and going through their state websites, look to get their particular state time specific timelines. And yes, that would be my advice.
I will close out first thanking Vicky, Parthu, Ale for joining us today and spending some time to answer all these questions. I want to thank all the participants for all these great questions and making this discussion fruitful, and the ones who will be listening to it in the future. And I want to thank ONTPD on TECaN and TECaN for having a session like this. Our goal and mission is to create more and more awareness of the hurdles in this process, so that in the future, at least for the future applicants, this will get more and more streamlined. So I would expect all the participants and all the beneficiaries to do the same in the future. Please create awareness on how long and how strenuous this process can be. And my take-home message is be transparent, be open about the process, and decide and know what you want and apply early. Apply very, very early, because time's not your friend when it comes to visa process with a job. So please, please apply early. With that, I think we'll close today's session. I will provide the organizers with all our email IDs, so that if you have any questions in the future, please feel free to shoot a question to one of us, and we'll be able to get those questions answered for you. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you.